live. Does that sound all right?
Yeah, perfect.
Lovely. So welcome everybody. Lovely to have you with us this afternoon. So thanks for making the time to join us. So just to make sure you're all in the right place, you're in a webinar under the You've Been Missed umbrella, which is around supporting young people to return back to school in the best way we possibly can. So that's a partnership piece of work that a number of us have been working on for a little while, which started around emotion-based school avoidance, but actually, given COVID has hit, it's taken us into a bit of the hashtag You've Been Missed seemed quite a nice way to bracket things all together. So hence you're all here today to listen to Rachel Ward from the STICK team to talk about the toolkit that they use with primary pupils around worry. So my name's Anna Robinson. I'm a psychotherapist who also works for the Birmingham Education Partnership. So I'm kind of your host for today, but Rachel will be doing the bulk of taking us through everything. And for anybody who's just joined us, just to say, Arjen, who's our administrator today, will probably mute you. It's not personal, it's just so we get a better sound quality. And also we are recording today's session. So, you know, feel free to have cameras on, turn them off, but by being in the session, you're then consenting to the recording. So Rachel, I'm going to hand over to you to kick us off. You mentioned chat as well, so do feel free to use the chat function for questions. We normally tend to have some time at the end to be able to take questions, so rather than take them as we go through, we'll do them at the end, but do feel free to kind of make a note of things in the chat as we go through. So Rachel, I'll hand over to you to introduce yourself a bit more fully, and we'll go from there.
Lovely, thank you so much, Anna. So yeah, thank you all so much for making the time and welcome. My name's Rachel, as Anna said. I'm one of the STICK practitioners, and if for those of you who may or may not have heard of STICK, we're a fairly new service. We've been around for a couple of years now, and what we predominantly do is early preventative types of interventions. So typically we're based in schools as well, so it feels quite fitting actually that you know we are delivering this training for you today. But if you haven't heard of STICK or FTB, it's FTB previously was known as CAMS, and there's lots of information out there, lots of information through You've Been Missed about STICK and that sort of thing. But what we're going to go through today is hopefully some really, really practical skills that you'll be able to take away with you. We're going to be talking you through typically what sort of interventions that we actually offer in STICK, and in today's webinar it's going to be in particular around worry. We did a webinar last week which was helping to identify the differences between worry and anxiety. So if a couple of you came on and joined us for that, I do apologise because some of it might be a little bit repetitive, but this is almost like the follow-on session from there, because you know once you've identified what it is, this webinar is designed to help you gain the skills to manage that in school. We did one earlier on today which was aimed at slightly older pupils, sort of towards secondary age. The content is very similar. The differences are the amount of information and kind of the language that's used, but the techniques are pretty much the same. And the same thing applies here as it did in the earlier webinar. This isn't something that we expect you to be able to take away and, you know, feel 100% confident in using. Some of you may experience that after this webinar, or some of you may just think actually there's elements of this that I can really take away and apply in my environment. Or you might, you know, just feel inspired to tweak resources that you already have in some way. But equally, what we're hoping is that this resource is detailed and clear enough that actually you could just pick it up and run with it and really use it as a resource within your schools and with your pupils. So I'm just going to share my screen now. Hopefully it works and you can all see it. Oh, not that. There we go. I hope everyone can see that. So as I said, this is a guide, and it really is just a guide. If you, like I said, want to take bits or leave bits, that's absolutely fine, because these techniques independently can work really, really well. But what we have done is put it in a really structured way so that you could pick it up and do it from start to finish. So it is quite detailed, and what we have at the very beginning is almost like a structure guide to it. So how long you should spend doing which sections and that sort of thing. But as I said, it really is a guide, and it's dependent on, you know, the type of young person that you're using it with. But the sorts of things that we're going to look at covering is, first of all, psychoeducation. And this is the bit that I apologise might be a little bit repetitive if you did come last week. But the psychoeducation is so important because we always believe that knowledge is power. So the moment a young person really understands what's happening to them, that is the moment that they are able to start managing it. If they don't really understand what their experiences are and why, it becomes really, really difficult for them to feel skilled enough to then manage that. So first part of this training will be about psychoeducation, and we really encourage every part of, you know, any intervention or support you might offer a young person to encourage a level of psychoeducation for that reason. So we're going to look at fight, flight or freeze theory, and we're going to look at what the brain's doing and what the body does when young people feel anxiety or worry. We're going to look at, again, how you can help explore that in a little bit more detail with them. So, you know, what worry looks like, what it feels like, what they do when they're worried and that sort of thing. And then the second half of the intervention is going to be looking at what you can do to help manage those worries, and some practical skills that hopefully you'll be able to take away with you. So starting off, and as I said, this is, I'm not going to read off the booklet that we've got here, because you can do that in your own time. I'm going to just talk through the way that we explain these things and what the aim of, you know, each section of the booklet is. But what we're hoping is that this is detailed enough that you, like I said, you would be able to take it away and almost read it word from word, and you'd have what you'd need in order to deliver this. So we start off by explaining what worry is. And worry is a survival response. So if we think about thousands and thousands of years ago, you know, the early, you know, stages of human life, back when cavemen and women roamed the earth, this was a time where they came into contact with, you know, really large, dangerous predators. It was a time where they had to hunt for survival every single day. And what happened was these humans weren't responding and dealing with these dangerous situations appropriately. And what happened was the human population started to decrease. So as an evolutionary response, the bodies then developed something called fight, flight or freeze in order to protect themselves. So what happened was the brain started to learn, actually, this is a dangerous situation and we need to do something in these moments. We either need to fight our way out of this danger, we need to flight, which would be to run or escape from this danger, or we need to freeze, like for example, let's play dead or let's hide, in order to survive these situations. And it worked, because what then happened was the human population started to increase again, and as we've evolved for thousands and thousands of years, this is something we still have innately within us. And that's exactly what worry is. It's exactly what anxiety is. It's a fight, flight, freeze response. So it's something our brain determines that we need in any particular moment. So it's important that we still have it now, because, for example, if I were to cross the road and I didn't look where I was going and a car was coming towards me, the moment I see that car, I would want my brain to think, we're in danger here and we need to react. We need to initiate fight, flight or freeze so we can jump out the way. So it's something the brain tells the body to do, which is really, really key. So once they know what anxiety is, that helps them learn, actually, it's not that scary, it's quite helpful. And that's the one thing I always say to the young people. If you can just remember that these awful, scary feelings that you have is just your body trying to keep you safe, that alone can be such a powerful message for them. It helps them not feel so scared or terrified when these things happen. But of course, the more information you can give them, the more they're able to understand why. And that's why we're going to move on to think about what actually is the brain doing. So why does some people's brain think we're in dangerous situations? Why does some people's brain not think it's a situation? So why do we have anxiety over different things, basically? And to explain this, we always use an analogy using the meerkat, the owl and the elephant. This is something that we use really, really widely within STIG. It's not actually developed by us. There's lots of TED Talks and, you know, resources online about this, but it's what we use to describe the brain function to professionals, to children, to parents. We always use this analogy because it makes so much sense and it really, really is easy to remember. So using these three animals, we're going to explain the function of the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the prefrontal cortex. But this is language that we've kind of tried to keep out of the younger children's booklet. In the older children, we do talk about these parts of the brain, but for these young kids, we just kind of stick to the animals because it's far easier for them to remember. So explain that the meerkat is called, we call this part of the brain the meerkat because, you know, we ask them, what does a meerkat do? What do you notice from a meerkat? And they always say, well, they stand up on their hind legs and they're always running around. And they understand that meerkats are quite nervous animals. As I said, they're on the hind legs, they're always on the lookout for danger. And that's exactly why we call this part of the brain the meerkat, because this is the part of our brain that's solely responsible for our survival. So it's the amygdala. It's the part of the brain that's always on the lookout. And really importantly, it's the part of the brain that initiates fight or flight. So the meerkat decides whether we're in danger or not. And what we always say is that the meerkat doesn't understand language. So when these young people are in, you know, that really intense, heightened state of anxiety, and you've probably experienced that they don't seem to understand when you talk to them, or they don't seem to hear when you're talking to them. And that is because the meerkat doesn't understand language. So when we're in this state, all the meerkat is wanting to do is to keep us safe. It's not thinking about anything else. And in order to do that, it initiates our fight or flight. So again, the way we explain is almost to imagine there's a big red button in your brain, and your meerkat sort of has its hand hovering over that button all the time. And it's constantly pushing that button every time it sees something that's going wrong, because it thinks that you need fight or flight for it. So what we always sort of say, the language that we use with young people, is that actually you've got active meerkats. So anxious children have very active meerkats who are always pushing this red button. And then we explain the reason that some young people have anxious meerkats, and it's because of the elephant. So the elephant is what we use to describe the hippocampus, which is the part of our brain that stores memory. So we call it the elephant because apparently elephants have good memories and they never forget. So the elephant stores everywhere we've been, all the experiences we've had, but it also remembers how we were feeling when we were experiencing those things. And young people who have had quite traumatic or difficult starts in life, we would say they've got an elephant who remembers all of that negative stuff. And the elephant and the meerkat have quite a special relationship. So the elephant feeds all of this information to the meerkat. So all of these, so we might say, you know, there might be 100 positive experiences and there might be one time where it went really wrong. Children with anxiety, their elephant remembers that one time it went wrong, not the 100 times it didn't. And that's what it tells the meerkat, which in turn causes the meerkat to worry and switch on this fight or flight response. And then we have the owl. So the reason we call this part of the brain, it's the prefrontal cortex. And the reason we call it the owl is because typically we characterize the owls as, you know, wise old owls. They're very sensible, they're logical and rational, and that's what this part of our brain does. However, it's a part of our brain that in females doesn't actually fully develop until they're in their 20s, and in males not until their 30s. So actually it makes an awful lot of sense that young people tend to struggle with anxiety because they haven't got that rational and logical part of their brain fully developed. Some young people are far further developed than others. So, for example, we always say that young people with anxiety or worry tend to have lazy owls. So it's there, it just doesn't quite perform, you know, in the function that others do. So we always say that, you know, some people can have an anxious meerkat and they can, you know, feel like, oh, we need to push fight or flight for a minute. But before that button is pushed, they've got an owl that comes along and says, actually, we don't need to worry about that one time it went wrong, because do we remember the 100 times it didn't? Whereas worried children have very anxious meerkats, they have negative elephants, and they've got really lazy owls. And that's kind of, you know, the combination that their brain is working in, which is why they end up in the states that they do, you know, those high states of arousal. So once they understand that, and what our experience is that kids really get it. I've explained this to young people as young as, you know, year one. and they've got it, they understand it. And it's funny because they're able to use these analogies to explain it back to you. They say, oh, I noticed my meerkat pushed my fight or flight. So they really do get it. So it might seem like quite a lot of information, but from our experiences, young people do tend to, you know, really understand it when you explain it in this way. And the benefit of that, of course, is they understand what's happening to them, and they understand it's just their meerkat getting confused. Nothing terrible is happening to them. You know, they're not in real danger. Their meerkat is confused. And that in itself is so reassuring. So once they know that, it's really important to help them understand actually what then happens. So we know why you're feeling anxious, but what does that then mean? And this is where we'd help them understand what is happening to their body. So what actually is happening in fight, flight or freeze, because that's what anxiety is. Those awful feelings that they feel, that's their body in fight, flight or freeze mode. So again, we're normalizing this and we're helping them understand what's happening. So this part of the booklet, it's just the opportunity for them to circle or colour in or highlight, whatever they want to do, different possible physical responses that they may feel. So these are some of the really typical ones. And actually we find with young people at first, they go, I don't know. But once you start calling it out and listing these things to them, they do start to associate, you know, their experiences with it. So we give them the opportunity to, you know, identify what's happening. And I would judge this based on age, how much information you then give them. Typically, if a young person was old enough to understand this, we'd explain why their body's doing what they're doing. So, for example, why their breathing has changed. Well, that's because your body's trying to take in lots of air, because air is energy, and we need energy if we're going to run or fight or freeze. Your heart rate gets quicker because we need to pump that energy around the body. We need it to go to the muscles that help us run, that help us fight. And you get them to think, which parts of the body do you use if you were running away or if you needed to fight? And of course, most young people can work out that actually that's places like my arms and it's like my legs. So then, of course, you would explain, well, the reason, you know, you get that shaky feeling in your arms and your legs is because your body's trying to get rid of this energy, because you're not really fighting, you're not really running away. So we need to get rid of this energy somehow. You may also explain that, you know, feelings like headaches and tummy aches, needing to go to the toilet, that's because energy is taken away from those parts of the body, because we don't really need our stomachs if we're fighting or flighting. You know, they're parts of our body that we aren't using when we're in this fight or flight response. So I would judge that based on an individual basis. So how a young person sort of responds. Is that something that's going to be helpful for them? Are they going to remember that? And is that going to offer comfort and reassurance? Or is that too much information? And is that going to overwhelm them? Judge that, you know, as I said, on a basis of the young person that you're working with. And then what we've got is we moved on to a little bit of homework. So we do set homework for exactly the same reasons as teachers. You would set homework. We only get an hour, if that, a week with these young people, and there's an awful lot of content that we would cover in an hour if we could. You know, we'd go based on the pace of the young person. But if they can take this home, they're more likely to consolidate this knowledge. Also, it's a way of connecting with parents as well, getting parents on board, particularly with these younger ages who are going to need probably help from parents to do these things. It gives parents the opportunity to, you know, understand actually what is it that they're learning, and how does that, you know, need to come into play at home. So this particular homework activity is a storyboard. So the fight or flight story is already written out for them, and it's just an opportunity for them to draw and colour in that story. So based on what they bring back to you in the next session, you can gauge their level of understanding. Like, have they really grasped this concept, or do they not quite understand what's happening in this fight or flight theory? But one thing with homework is you may get some kids who do it, you may get some kids who don't. Of course, it's so much better if they do, but it's not compulsory. We can't force a young person to do the homework. Another bit of homework that we've given them is for them to start to label those feelings in their body. So when we were looking at it earlier, they have the opportunity to circle the ones they felt applied to them, but this gives them the opportunity to sort of consolidate that. So the next time you start to feel worried, as soon as you're able to, write down what you noticed feeling, or get mum or dad to write down what they noticed happening to you. They noticed you had your clenched fists. They noticed you said your tummy hurted. They noticed you got quite hot and sweaty. So again, it's an opportunity to pull parents in, but it's an opportunity for them to really consolidate these feelings. And part of this activity is for them to develop an understanding of what we call their early warning sign, which is the first physical response that they notice happening. And it's really, really key for young people, because we'll come on to some of the other techniques, but very often young people struggle to kind of work with the thoughts, but feelings are a lot clearer to them. They can tell you what they feel. They struggle to tell you what they were thinking in that moment, and that's just because of, you know, a developmental thing. They might not be at that stage where they're able to do that. So actually, if we can help them identify what the first thing happens when they go into their fight or flight, that gives them opportunity to put something into place. Whereas if we do nothing, it escalates and it gets to the point where we're in full, you know, panic mode. And as we know, in that stage, meerkat's in charge. We're in full blown fight or flight, and we can't talk to the meerkat. We just have to let these feelings run their course almost. So the sooner we can catch it, the better. And that's what this early warning sign is for. So then we would move on to another stage of psychoeducation, essentially, which is to help them identify triggers, so the things that actually cause their meerkat to switch fight or flight on. So there's just some suggestions here, but essentially what you'd want to do is use them as prompts for them to then talk about or draw or write down their own specific responses. And again, it's a good way to gauge how much understanding they already have. But again, it might be about talking with parents to get that knowledge if you aren't sure, or talking with, you know, teachers or other staff members that work with them if they aren't able to identify it themselves. But show them, say, oh, this is what your teacher said you got upset about the other day. Did this happen? And then getting them to reflect on the information that you've gathered. But some kids will really clearly be able to tell you. And if the reason this next stage is so important is because often they can't say. So it's really important that you and those around this young person learn when they're anxious, because they might not be able to say, oh, this is what's triggered me, and this is what I'm feeling, and this is what I'm thinking. But they can communicate their anxiety through their, you know, facial responses and their facial expressions. And that's what this is for. It's kind of for them, but it's also for you as professionals and the people that are working with them to understand actually what happens when we get worried. What does it look like, or what do you think you look like? So again, it's just helping them explore what do they think happens when they're anxious. And again, they can draw what their worried faces are, and that gives you cues and signals as the adults around them. So okay, they're now biting, and then, you know, that's what they typically do when they're anxious. So they might not present in a very obvious anxious way, but this is their way of communicating those really small signals to you. And then this is another thing, again, for professionals, but also for them. So again, for professionals, it's a good way for them to show you, like, I either look like this or I'm doing this when I'm anxious. So I'm checking things, or I'm crying, I'm avoiding things or people, or, you know, that sort of thing. But also it's a good way of helping them understand patterns that they might not have even realised they do when they're anxious. So again, it gives you the opportunity to circle the ones that apply to them. But again, it's more just as a prompt to get them really talking about, actually, this is what I do. This is what I did last week. And, you know, draw on recent experiences. This is what I always find with the younger group. If they go, I don't know. So, okay, when was the last time you remember feeling worried? And if they say, oh, it was yesterday, what happened? And then just get them to talk about that specific event, rather than trying to think, what is worry and what do I do and what does it feel like? Just really pinpoint it down. Okay, when was the last time you worried? And, you know, probably these kids worry a lot because there's a reason that you'll be doing this with them. So hopefully there'll be quite a recent event, and get them to just focus on that recent event. And then you can, you know, work out patterns from there. But it's a good way to get them to focus, rather than trying to think of worry can be such an abstract concept and it's not tangible for them. But pinpointing it makes it more accessible for them. But this is another way, again, and it's really important that parents can be on board, or, you know, support at least for the younger ages. This is a really good way of putting it almost into a bit of a almost a bit of a pattern for them. So all the things that we've looked at so far is, what it feels like, what it looks like, what I do. So what we're going to do now is plot it all. So let's put it in in something that's, again, tangible for them. So this is a worry diary. So again, it's part of their homework. Just capture what was happening. And this is really good for the kids that up until this point, they've said, I don't know, don't know, don't know, don't know. Okay, well, let's do it live and in the moment. You can't go back and you can't reflect on these things. So let's capture it as it's happening. So when you were worrying, and what time was it? What was your early warning sign? Triggers. What can you identify what you were thinking, and importantly, what happened and what did you do? So this is, again, like I said, a good way for parents to know exactly what you're working on, get them on board. But again, it's really good for those kids who are just, I don't know, I'm not sure, because they often really struggle to reflect. Maybe they've parked those incidences, in the back of their mind. It's difficult for them to go back to that and reflect on that. So actually this gives them the opportunity to almost capture some of that information live as it's happening throughout the week. And it's really valuable information that they'll probably bring back to you that you can then use to work forward. You can almost then go back to the top of, the previous bits of the intervention and go back and fill it in then. Or what we know now, that something that you do is you stopped eating that day. So let's go back and circle that. So it can be a really helpful tool to use at this stage. So that kind of summarises the psycho-ed half of this intervention. And what we've built up to is identifying triggers, so particular thoughts that the meerkat has. We'll have identified the physical responses, so actually what their body feels during fight or flight, and we'll have identified behaviours, so particular things that they do or express when they're anxious or worried. And that's really important because it gives us 3 different ways of managing this emotion: managing the thoughts, managing the feelings, and managing the behaviours. And that's the way this second half is broken down. So what we look at first is actually managing the worried thoughts. So this is a technique. It's a CBT-based technique, which looks at restructuring the thinking. So identifying actually what is the meerkat thought, which in CBT terms we call the negative automatic thought. So that intrusive, worried, anxious thought that enters their mind. And how do we change it, or how do we replace it? So little example here. So what if something bad happens to mum when we're at school? What we're really trying to do here is, what would the owl say? The sensible, now remember, the owl is the really sensible, wise, clever part of our brain. What would the owl say about that? And this is where hopefully they'll be able to access some of that logical thinking. So they might start to say, nothing's going to happen to mum. Nothing bad has ever happened to mum while we've been at school before. Mum spends loads of time on her own. She can look after herself. Mum's a really sensible person. She doesn't do dangerous things, and she never puts herself in risky situations. So you might need to start encouraging this. And one way to get young people, because this is quite difficult, I would always say that challenging the thoughts is always the most difficult part of any intervention with a young person, because they're so set in their negative ways, and very often this is how they've thought for quite a while. So one really good way, because they might not be able to just do that thinking like that. So one way to do it is to create some hypothetical situations first. So you might not actually use a worry that they have. You might create some hypothetical ones first, because actually, if it's not something that causes them anxiety, they should be able to apply a lot of logical thinking to it. So you can do a hypothetical one and show them, look, you could do this really sensible thinking. Look, that's sensible. That's your owl there. So I know your owl is there, and I know your owl can do lots of sensible, helpful, logical thinking. Now let's try it on your thought. Or you could switch it up and say, what would you say, identify a best friend that they have? What would you say if your best friend was saying this to you? So getting to depersonalize it. It's not what I'm thinking. It's not my meerkat. What would my owl say to my friend's meerkat? If my friend came to me and told me they were worried about mum at school, what would you say to them? And very often they're able to give you owl thoughts. Or I'd tell them not to worry. I'd say, your mum's fine, your mum's here, school would let you know if anything bad happened. They're really often able to offer that logical thinking when it's not applied to their own thoughts. So just some advice there for some of the kids who can't do that thinking like that, but some of them can just access that logical thinking straight away. So what we're trying to do, and this is the way to explain it, was we're trying to get your lazy owl to be a little bit more helpful. So when your meerkat starts to worry, your owl comes along and offers some really, really helpful advice. So then this is where you get them to do a couple of examples. This is maybe where you do your hypothetical ones, and then you might try and do one that's actually linked to their own personal worries and thoughts. And there's a really important message here as well, which is that don't be disheartened if this feels difficult, or don't be disheartened if you're going about your day and actually your owl isn't helping you out straight away. You know, explain to them that your owl's not fully developed yet. It's something that is going to need time, and that is really key. These thought restructuring techniques don't take effect straight away. It is something that needs persistence, and it is something that needs time, but it is the most effective way of managing their anxieties if they can grasp this, if they can change from these illogical, irrational meerkat thoughts to sensible, rational owl type thinking. And what we also want them to identify at this stage is who are the best people to help you. So whether that be teachers, friends, family, pets, sometimes are what they always write in this box here, or teddies. But what we really want, we do want some humans in there, because again, what we want is if we can't access our own owl, we want to access somebody else's. So again, give them example. What would mom say if you came to mom with this worry? Oh, mom would tell me this and mom would tell me that. So they can access it if it's not about them, if it's not their owl, if it's not, you know, personal to them. They can say, well, this is what mom would say. Well, doesn't that make sense? And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, yeah, actually. So what we're explaining to them is if we can't access our own owl, if our owl's really stubborn and really lazy and isn't going to help us out, whose owl can we use? And that's where they would identify some really helpful people to turn to for support the moment they notice that early warning sign. Because remember, that's the moment they know that they need some help. So in here, they can draw it, list it, colour it, whatever they want to do, make it creative. And then that's some homework again for them to try. Try and do one meerkat thought to owl thought as homework throughout the week. And that's when we then move on to managing the worried feelings. So what we've done is at this stage, they know, okay, this is how I stop my worried thoughts. And that's great, because if I don't have the worried thoughts, my fight or flight's not initiated. But as I've just explained, that's not something that they're going to be able to do like that. They're going to need some techniques that help them and support them along the way while they're developing how helpful their owl is. And that's why it's really important that we then need to help them know what to do if fight or flight does happen, because it will, because they're not going to get this overnight. And that's why we need to learn to switch off these worried feelings. So again, this is where I'd recap and normalise all of those feelings, remind them, go back to that, you know, little person that they had where they linked all those sensations, go back to that. And this is where we're going to teach them to do some like deep breathing. And the function of the deep breathing is again to oxygenise the body and just, you know, bring back an even equilibrium. So the body's, all the functions are just returning to normal. So the process is basically, it's really simple, that they have to breathe in through their nose. They hold their breath. 5 seconds is what's on this sheet, but some young people, 3 seconds might be more appropriate. And then they breathe out through their nose, or through their mouth, sorry. And they repeat until they feel calm. And the reason this is helpful is for a few reasons. As I said, it's flooding the body with oxygen, but also that 5 or 3 second pause is so important, because all of a sudden they're back in control. And that's something that we always tell them. We say, look, when you're in fight or flight, you can't control any of this. Your meerkat's decided what to do. He's taken over. He's switched on your fight or flight. So actually, let's get you back in control again. Let's get you in control of your breathing. Because when you're in control of your breathing, everything else starts to break down, because you're choosing what's happening to your body all of a sudden. So breathing is a brilliant way to help them do that. And usually they're really happy to try it out, and they quite enjoy it, and they feel the instant benefits of it as well. And that then brings us on to muscle relaxation. So again, explain the purpose of this. What we're really trying to do is burn off all that extra energy. You know, when your arms and legs are shaking, well, we want to help the body burn that off in a more helpful way. So we're going to get nice and relaxed, and you do some deep breathing first, like we practiced on the other page. And then we're going to clench and release different parts of our body for 5 seconds. So we do like hands, then tummy, legs, feet, face, you know what, and it doesn't have to be exactly on here as well. Just get them to isolate, tense and relax their body. Again, we're putting back elements of control, but we're also burning off those additional resources that they don't need. And again, you just repeat that as many times as they want. And then exercise, and again, kids are always really happy to try and do this in the session. From my experience, they love running around and jumping up and down at this stage. So again, explain the function. We want the brain to release happy hormones, because that's what happens when we're exercising. We also want to burn off the energy, but also if we're doing something really fun, our brain's distracted as well. So if we're happy and enjoying this game of football, can our meerkat also be worried about mom at home? It's really difficult to do the two things at once. And so explain it to them like that. So you can do some exercises on the spot with them in the session, so they can run on the spot for 10 seconds. They might want to do some star jumps, might want to do hopping. So get them to do it and then ask them how they feel. Normally they've got a huge smile on their face and they're absolutely like completely out of breath. So explain to them, can you see how tired your body is now? Can you see how fun that was? So help them understand why exercise is so important. And then, of course, get them to think about the activities that they could do outside of the sessions. And then we would look at, so at this stage then, we've looked at how we can stop the thoughts, which we know takes a little bit of time. So we've now equipped them to manage some of those feelings for the times actually we haven't been able to catch the thoughts and it's developed into fight or flight. That's okay. Let's manage that as well. And this is the sort of stage where actually we haven't been able to stop the thoughts and we haven't been able to stop the anxious feelings. What can I do next? And this is really important, because this is almost like the last stage at which they can stop fight or flight without it becoming a negative pattern. Because if they continue to do the same things, the same thoughts, have the same physical responses, behave in the same way, their brain starts to learn, and it's just the elephant that starts to go, well, this is really helpful because they're still here, they're still safe, they're okay, and this is really working, you know, nothing bad's happened to them. And that's what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to avoid these vicious negative cycles that happen in young people with anxiety and adults. It's the same process. So changing the behaviours is sort of the last stage at which we can stop that cycle. And it's important because once we've broken that cycle once, you know, change the pattern of what happens, the elephant also remembers that and starts to think, oh, actually, fight or flight isn't what's keeping us safe, and maybe it's not as helpful as we think. So the way that we work through the behaviours is probably the simplest part of the intervention, and it's mostly through distraction. So in a similar way as I was explaining with exercise, what we really, really want is to think about activities that are going to either completely distract in a way that makes them either feel happy or relaxed, or they're really concentrating on something, anything that's the complete opposite emotion basically from anxiety. And that's what we're moving on to here when we talk about grounding. So grounding is an exercise that's quite fairly similar to mindfulness, which you might or might not have heard of by now. But the kids love doing this because, again, it's something that they can do in the session and it's fun and it's a bit different from just sitting and talking. So what we ask them to do is identify their 5 senses. And then using those 5 senses, they have to really take note of what's going on around them in the room. And that's effective for 2 reasons. Because 1, it shows the meerkat, actually, this is what's happening. Because what happens when we go into fight or flight is our meerkat has perceived we are in a dangerous situation. But by really making the meerkat take note of what is happening, it realises actually maybe we're not in this dangerous situation that we thought. What I think was happening really isn't happening. So maybe I don't need fight or flight. But also they love it, and it's a great distraction. It gets them thinking about something else other than these anxious thoughts. So the idea is you get them to identify 5 things that they can see in the room around them. They identify 4 things that they can feel. So maybe that's internally sensations they can feel, or physically things that they can touch around them. 3 sounds they can hear, 2 things they can smell, and 1 thing that they can taste. And then by that point, that's probably a couple of minutes. Typically, they're a lot calmer, they're a lot more distracted. But this can be developed and adapted to do as many rounds as possible. So, the next round, let's pick out 5 items that are square and then 4 things that are blue. I've known families that have done it, with kids who are maybe like football mad. And they've said, okay, name me 5 Liverpool players, and now name me 4 players who play for the Blues, or whatever it may be. And these, football mad kids all of a sudden are like obsessed with talking about football, and they've not remembered what they were anxious about. So it doesn't necessarily even have to be used in this way. But as I was saying, these are techniques that hopefully you'll be able to take away and adapt to suit you. But I've known families use it in lots and lots of different ways, and it always, works really well. There's also, so again, this is where we get them to think about really basic distractions. So the things that they really enjoy doing: colouring, drawing, dancing, riding on their bike. It could be literally anything. In school, it might be, I like when I have jobs for the teachers. I like when I get to play with my friends. I like, anything in school that will create a sense of safety, comfort, relaxation, or happiness. That works. And the same applies for home. Typically home is a lot easier to work it out, but school, there usually are some really, really good techniques as well, and different strategies that they can use at school to distract themselves. And then as homework, what they have to do is draw around their hand, and on their hand they then have to write down the top 5 distraction techniques that they like. So what are the things that they enjoy doing the most, their top 5. So again, it encourages them to really explore all of the options, and then it really gets them to focus on what they like and why. And that then leads us on to a worry plan. Now, I think this is such an important part of any intervention, particularly for these younger kids, because it's tangible. It summarises everything into one place. So all this hard work that they've done, it can be really daunting if you to use the booklet on its own as a resource, scanning through, what am I looking for, which bits of information do I need. A worry plan just condenses it all really nicely into one place. So this is really good. It can almost be sometimes used as a bit of an agreement, a contract maybe, in a really informal, playful way between you and the young person to say, is this what you're going to agree to continue doing, and there's things that you as a teacher or a professional may agree to continue doing in order to support them. And again, you can pull parents into this plan as well, but essentially you help them identify what their worry plan is, what their early warning sign is. Again, so they always remember, this is the moment something's wrong and I need to do something, whether that's breathing or grounding, or maybe I can jump back and work out what my meerkat thought is and change it to an owl thought, whatever works for them best. And what are my overall top 5 techniques? So what are the things that I find are the most helpful for me? And again, this is such a helpful resource for schools as well, because you now know the things that you can directly put in front of them to do. Who can you rely on for help? So who are the people that are there? So they might identify, certainly yourselves as staff members to turn to. So again, you're aware of that kind of responsibility that you may then have. And just a little reminder, when I'm worried, my body's just trying to keep me safe. So just something to really summarise everything into one, really. And, they can keep this in maybe their drawer or their school bag. I always encourage families to pop it up on the fridge as well, so everybody's on board and everyone knows what the plan is. So yeah, that's essentially it. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I've missed. I'm conscious that it was quite a whistle-stop tour, so I really do apologise that it was quite a lot of information in a short amount of time. But what I was saying earlier was just and as you probably saw as I was going through, the document's really, really quite detailed. It's very self-explanatory, so I'm hoping that at each stage there's enough information there that you could almost just read it word from word, and you could deliver this. But look, equally, if you want to just pull techniques from it, each technique is explained how to do it and why it's helpful, so hopefully it'll be really easily adapted as well. So I'm probably going to stop sharing now, actually. There we go. So I guess,
are you happy to take some questions, Rachel?
Yeah, I'm happy to. We've got probably a little bit more time for questions, which is really good. I'm happy for people to continue using the chat box. Sorry, I haven't been able to read it as I was going along, so I'm just going to catch myself up if there's anything.
That's right. I just popped in a couple of extra resources in there as well as we were going through.
Wow. Thank you. Oh, lovely. Thank you. So if anybody does have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them in the chat box now. Happy if you want to send them just privately to me as well. If you don't want to post them publicly, you can just change where it says to on the drop down box. You can change it just to my name. Or if you're happy to just pop comments on as well, that'd be fine. I believe has the resource already been sent, or is it being sent today, Anna?
The ones, if there are people here who were also with us this morning, they've gone. So if anybody hasn't received them, if you were here this morning, then just check your junk. But for the ones for this afternoon, I've passed on to our comms team, so hopefully they will all come to you. But do just check your junk folder, because sometimes things go a bit AWOL in there.
Yeah, perfect. We do actually just have a poll. If Arjun, you're right to put the poll up, just to get a little bit of feedback from you. I guess we want to know if this is working, if we need to adapt it at all, if we need to run it again or whatnot. So if people would mind just answering the poll, that would be really handy. And then if you don't have any more questions and you don't want to hang around, if you could just pop a comment in the comments box just about how you found the training today, that would be really helpful. Again, it can just be privately to me, or if you're happy to post it publicly, that's fine. And then if there are no more questions, I am happy to stay on here and answer more questions. Yeah, the booklet is going to go out. Oh, thank you.
Yes, I have asked for them to be sent out today, but I will just ping a reminder email to my two colleagues.
So at the beginning of the work booklet, there are guidance on how long to spend. It's typically around 45 minutes to an hour per session, and I think that's all broken down into 4 sessions. However, that is purely just a guide. I would certainly imagine there's a lot of young people that would need longer for that. Some kids might only manage half an hour at a time. I would just take it step by step. What's quite nice is they've broken down quite nicely into sections, so it's quite easy to stop and start it. It's almost like each page is an activity and you can stop and start, but there are some guidance at the beginning of the page about how long to spend and that sort of thing. The pictures, I actually don't know. Yeah, the pictures I'm sure could be amended. I don't know how we send it out. What kind of version do we send it out in a PDF?
So we've PDF'd it, but I mean, okay, you're most welcome to, copy and paste whatever you want out of there, or snip it out and things, and make it, make stuff relevant for the context in which you're working, would be my guess. It's always I think it's difficult when you've got resources like that that have been put together by other clinicians. You don't want people tweaking them massively because you don't want to take them out of the context in which they were created. Yeah. But absolutely, I think that's a fair point about different
absolutely
ethnicities and things. It's very sensible.
Yeah, lovely. Oh, thank you all so much for your comments. If you've made a comment, you've answered the poll, and you have no further questions, feel free to go.
Just also to add, so if any of you were in the DSL briefing at all yesterday, I think Erin, Rachel's boss, would have been talking about some of the Youth in Mist campaign stuff. So there are banners and things that schools are going to be able to order that just have hashtag Youth in Mist, which you can put up on gates and things like that. So Arjen, can I ask you to put the the stick team email into the chat, so that if people want to, thank you very much, want to get in touch to say yes, they want to get hold of something, then they can get in touch with you. That's brilliant. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you. The poll should have just automatically popped up on your screen. If not, will they be able to get it from the bottom page? I'm wondering. At the very bottom page, it says polls. If you click on that, it might pop up then. It's just 3 questions, multiple choice, and then a case of submitting it. If you're struggling, don't worry too much though.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the poll's ended now anyway, so you might not be able to get onto it, so don't worry. Oh, thank you, everybody.
That's great. Yes, if anybody's got any questions, then just pop them down. But otherwise, thank you, Rachel. I know, you know, the last couple of sessions that we've done have been really well received. So if people want to come to any more, I think I've put the booking links a little bit further up in the chat that people can book on to any of the other webinars that we've got remaining. So you're going to be doing a repeat, aren't you, of the very first session that we did, which was the sort of normalising anxiety and worry. And I guess the one thing I would say to all of you is that, you know, it is quite normal to feel anxious after any period of extended absence from something. So any of you who've taken maternity leave, been off work sick for a while, it is entirely normal to feel anxious about a return. Most of the time, we are fine and we get through the door. I mean, even after a holiday, I can feel like that, you know, you get through the door and you're fine. But I think that's a reminder for staff as well as pupils, actually, that it is quite normal that re-entry into work, into school is hard after a period of absence.
Yeah, so this training is almost the one that we run next week, is to kind of help you identify the differences. So what is a normal level of anxiety, level of worry, and when has it tipped into that more serious stage of anxiety that might need a slightly different approach. And there's a fine line. So we've tried to put a really informative and practical, helpful training session together with some resources that go along with it to help you make some of those differentiations. So we're running that again next Thursday at 11, I believe it is, off the top of my head. Just doing a double check. Don't want to give everyone the wrong time. Yeah, 11 o'clock. So feel free. I will warn you, some of it might be similar to what we did today. Some of the psycho-ed stuff will be similar, but the rest of it is quite different, so it should still be helpful. Is there a repeat one for the older children? We haven't got a repeated date yet.
But we have got the, we've recorded this morning's session. So so that will, I've just put up actually the BWC site, which has got all the You've Been Missed stuff on. So as far as I'm aware, once we, if this is a world that I know nothing about, once you can get things into the right format, they'll be up on that website, I gather.
Yeah.
And yes, there are more webinars. So I'll go back and just post on the link again where you can find them all. Just give me 1 second to scroll back and find it. There we go. There you go.
Lovely. Yeah, so some of the ones in September we're doing around sort of self-esteem. There's some low mood ones.
Self-harm is one.
I think we're doing anger maybe.
Anger, yes.
So some quite different stuff in September.
Yeah.
We felt it was quite important to do the anxiety one now, because I think that's going to be the one that you're all going to see in September when all the kids go back. So I think it now seemed like a good time to deliver some of that in preparation, really. So yeah, but yeah, so please feel free to continue to submit any questions. If you have no questions, we're happy to leave a comment. That would be great. And then of course you have welcome to log off and carry on with your day.